Hello! A year ago, if you've told me that I'd be making a video on the 6 hidden risks of IFS and that I'd get seriously hurt by IFS therapy, I would have laughed. I might even have called you a lunatic. Turns out you'd have been Nostradamus. I went through it with an IFS practitioner level 1, training for level 2 back then. And I'm not alone. Experts like Janina and Joanne Twombly agree. From the self not being accessible to most people to the cult-like behaviors, IFS has some major blind spots. Today, we're unpacking those 6 hidden risks. Let's dive in. I am Benjamin, and this is the Florin Benjamin Show. Risk number 1: self-inaccessibility and self as another manager. At the core of IFS lies the promise of a calm, compassionate self that can heal everything, even the most extreme parts. But for many trauma survivors, that self simply never shows up. Joanne Twombly puts it bluntly. Generally speaking, IFS says that you can do IFS with anybody. And what I'm saying is that it really needs something added to it. She's observed that clients carrying complex chronic wounds often cannot reliably access this inner leader. Worse, they may believe they found a self only to discover it's a compliance-driven facade. Sometimes the client will say, "I'm in self." They think they are, but they're actually blended with the compliant part. They believe they're calm and compassionate, but the physiology says they're still flooded. Janina underscores the fallout as well. Without a genuine self to shepherd the process, parts work can stall indefinitely, leaving flood-prone exiles and protectors locked in an endless loop. Risk number 2: IFS lacks real-time coping skills and body grounding, somehow related to the first point of our discussion. And the first risk: the IFS training often jumps straight to find self, talk to parts. But trauma clinicians and seasoned IFS therapists say that approach floods clients instead of regulating them. A level 3 trained IFS therapist shared this on Reddit 2 years ago. In my experience, not all clients have easy access to self. So when they're really hurting, how are we supposed to help them? Direct access only? If that's the case, does that really work? In my experience, no. The client might be drowning in emotional turmoil and stress in daily life, and IFS does not equip clients with coping skills like grounding or resourcing. You can find the same conclusion if you listen to Janina. You must go to the body. The reason is blunt. This talking cure was not working for trauma, because trauma is remembered more as feelings and body sensations than a narrative. When threat hits, very unfortunately the prefrontal cortex shuts down, because when we're under threat, thinking is very slow and inefficient, and the thinking brain will shut down, as if you'd never had that conversation. That's why she warns that asking people to talk about the events is actually counterproductive. Instead, Fisher teaches embodied science experiments. Let's try a science experiment. Let's just see what happens if you breathe and concrete anchors follow. Grounding with the feet is actually really helpful. Just stay with your feet. Your feet will not fail you, and the hand on the heart is one of my favorite science experiments. All of this is aimed at widening what we call the window of tolerance, so clients can actually tolerate whatever they feel. Risk number 3. Amplifying dissociation and fragmentation. Here's the uncomfortable truth. For some trauma systems, intense parts dialogue can pull things further apart. As Janina puts it, the traumatized brain and nervous system intensifies any feeling or experience they have, so survivors constantly feel overwhelmed by the intensity of their emotion, or they're numb, equally overwhelmed by the inability to feel. Joanne Twombly is blunt about the risk when IFS is applied without dissociation guardrails. Being a hope merchant can be very dangerous for people with dissociative disorders. And she spells out what dangerous looks like in practice. I don't want to risk having the leads they've had on their trauma history being blasted open before they know how to handle what's underneath it. She also notes why self-led work can stall or backfires in these systems. Parts have to be very walled off. Fisher's stabilization first stance lines up with that. Asking people to talk about the events is actually counterproductive, and dissociative phenomena can be dramatic. The most striking dissociative symptoms is this young person seems like different people at different times. In other words, pushing dialogue can amplify fragmentation unless arousal is regulated. Twombly protocol is concrete. Teach containment and orienting before deep parts work. Safe space imagery, odor effect regulation skills, container imagery, upgrading their ability to dissociate so they dissociate better. Without that foundation, even well-intended part conversations can worsen derealization and detachment. Risk number 4. Model dogmatism. Everything is a part. You walk into therapy with panic, numbness, insomnia, a rocky relationship, maybe a bad reaction to meds, but in a parts-only room, whatever shows up gets run through the same filter. That's a part. Your panic, firefighter. Your hesitation with the therapist, protector. Your request for concrete tools, a manager resisting. Even the rupture in the relationship becomes your parts don't trust, instead of the therapist checking their own pacing or mistakes. Session after session, the answer to everything is, let's ask that part. Meanwhile, no one teaches you basic regulation, breath orienting, movement, sleep hygiene, what it means to have a good nutrition. Symptoms get over-mentalized, the body gets ignored. Calm compliance gets praised as self, even while your nervous system is still buzzing or shut down. That's the problem with model dogmatism. It collapses a complex life biology, attachment history, environment, the actual therapist-client dynamic into a single story. It breeds rigidity and confirmatory bias. You needed flexibility, you got a theory. You needed grounding, you got more dialogue. Red flags to notice. Every boundary voice is reinterpreted as a blocking part. You live with insight, but no coping skills. The therapist subtly discourages adding somatic work, skills training, or medical consultation because IFS is enough. The fix isn't abandoning parts language, it's de-idolizing it. Keep relational accountability in the room. Sometimes the issue is the fit, not your parts. Risk number 5. Therapist over identification and projection. My personal experience. This is my personal story with IFS. After 6 months, I was worse off. I've anonymized the practitioner for ethical reasons. My practitioner was level 1. Moving into level 2 when I started, she's now in level 3 training. She's reported somatic experiencing certification to me, countless classes, 500 hours of her own IFS, and 20 plus years of talk therapy overall. Talk therapy, she said, hadn't worked, IFS had. She emphasized that IFS demands personal inner work to certify. Sent me photos with Richard Schwartz that she took, and kept sharing IFS trainings and seminar links to me. She even used that fake self voice, which a lot of IFS therapists mimic. It sounds like a calm and protecting voice that they believe is the self, while many times actually themselves being triggered or dissociated in that moment. So how did the therapy go? From day one, I disclosed a post-psychedelic terror state, dissociation, derealization, a shot nervous system. She said she was trained in IFS and somatic experiencing, but not a clinician, diagnostician. I accepted that. I've always valued competence over titles. Despite my state, sessions went straight into parts dialogue. No phase 1 plan, no somatic containment. Predictably, more dissociation, more unreality, less agency. I was getting worse session by session. Every worsening was seen as how beautiful your system is opening like a flower. There are so many layers we can explore. I got to a point where I heard a voice inside me that said, "You have to end this work with your practitioner now." Even the final session was more parts work. No review of what happened or how I was doing overall. Afterwards, she repeatedly invited me to video calls to settle things, to give her feedback. I declined. About 6 months later, when I named the harm, she replied warmly, but centered on her own journey. Intentions, more trainings, commitment to excellence, and a request for a second chance. She sent a long audio message full of autobiography, then deleted this message after I wrote her the following: "Thanks for your message. Even if you're not a clinician, please reconsider how you accept clients for IFS or somatic experiencing. You're heavily identified with your own healing story, which blocks clear reading of client needs. I'm not part of your recovery. Please don't use clients as stepping stones for your growth. The focus must be on my safety and goals, not your model or trainings. Framing this as me not giving you a second chance is emotionally manipulative. The ethical issue is your initial choice to do parts work without stabilization. I appreciate your sincerity. Please reflect and adjust your screening and pacing. Best wishes." This is therapist over-identification in practice. The practitioner recovery narrative becomes the treatment plan. Readiness and contraindications get ignored because it worked for me. Somatic tools go unused while I'm told, "Go inside." Accountability dissolves into autobiography. A therapist's personal healing can be inspiring, but when it steers your care, it becomes projection. Risk number 6, cult-like dynamics and resistance to critique. When any therapy model gets hot, it risks sliding from method to movement. With IFS, even pro-IFS insiders have started calling out the vibe. Physician and longtime IFS collaborator Lisa Rankin warns about IFS enthusiasts who grasp onto this newly popular therapy model with cult-like missionary zeal, adding that in some online spaces dissent is not always welcomed, and skeptics are sometimes shamed for not being 100% IFS purists. Even Dick Schwartz, the founder, acknowledges the zeal. "There are an increasing number of IFS zealots," he told Ranking, while arguing the model is an anti-cult in intention. That's the tension. stated openness versus pockets of purity culture. On the ground, clients notice the same pattern. One Redditor calls their experience some kind of strange psychology cult, while another writes that therapists who use it often act like a cult, as they think that method will always work and has no side effects. A third flags a classic self-sealing move. Any challenge to the axioms of the therapy are refuted as being from a part. Clinicians who treat complex trauma have also pushed back on purity. Joanne Twombly documents how early IFS trainings taught, oh no, you don't need coping skills. Everybody's got everything they need, and critiques the belief that IFS can heal everything. She also describes how strict parts language can become insular. It blocks from being able to take in other kinds of trainings. Janina, a senior trauma clinician, models the opposite of dogma, mixing methods on purpose. In her words, sensory-motor psychotherapy can be mixed in with any method. That stance, plural, not closed, undercuts the one model to rule them all mindset that often fuels cult-like dynamics. Bottom line for viewers: no, IFS isn't a cult, but some corners of the community show classic culty behaviors. Your safety check is simple. If a practitioner can't tolerate questions, integrate other tools, or name limits, that's not self, it's ideology. The promise of a healing self is noble, and it might actually work. Together with the system of parts, the trainings and titles, none of it matters if your nervous system doesn't feel safe. For some of us, the search for self became another job, another costume. What helped was simpler: a body that felt a little less haunted, a day that felt a little more livable. IFS isn't a villain or a savior, it's a language, useful in moments, misleading in others. What stayed with me wasn't the theory, but the felt truth. When something is right, it quiets you. When it isn't, it fractures you. That's the compass. No matter the path you choose, may that leave you more here, more steady, and less disturbed. Before you go, if you like this episode, feel free to watch this next episode. Until next time, Benjamin.